Behind a grand marble doorway, a world of rolled wisdom waits. You stand in the heart of a Roman library, breathing air thick with the dry, sweet scent of papyrus. It is a place of immense weight, not just from the countless scrolls, but from the collective knowledge of an entire civilization pressing in from every niche. We are about to unlock these shelves and discover what they truly held. This journey will uncover the incredible and diverse contents of Roman libraries, revealing far more than just famous poetry. We will find secret military manuals that guided generals to victory, personal letters that swayed emperors, and texts that contained the very soul of Roman intellectual life. By the end, you will understand the complete picture of a Roman library, a treasure trove that shaped the Western world. What secrets were tucked away in the scrolls of a Roman senator's private collection? Did they possess knowledge we have since lost forever? What single piece of lost Roman writing would you most want to discover for yourself? That first great public library was the brainchild of a man named Asinius Pollio. After a successful military career, he poured his wealth into creating a temple for knowledge open to every Roman citizen, the Library of Palatine. Stepping inside was an experience designed to overwhelm the senses and inspire awe. You would find yourself in a vast, high-ceilinged hall, the floor a mosaic of cool stone, and the walls lined with what looked like beautiful, intricate wooden cabinets. These were the armaria, the scroll cases. Each niche was a sacred space, its scrolls identified by a small parchment tag, a syllabus dangling from the end, whispering the title of the work within. The library was deliberately divided into two separate wings, one for Greek texts and one for Latin. This architectural choice was a powerful statement. It declared that Rome was now the equal of Greek culture, the new custodian of the world's accumulated wisdom. But these buildings were far from silent, dusty tombs for old scrolls. They pulsed with life. Imagine the murmur of a crowd gathered for a public reading, where a poet would debut his latest work. Picture scholars engaged in heated debate in a sunlit corner, or citizens from all walks of life simply coming together to share ideas. This was the library's true purpose, a bustling cultural heart where knowledge was not just stored, but actively lived and breathed, a proud symbol of what it meant to be Roman. These beautiful wooden cabinets held objects of a very specific design. The primary treasure of a Roman library was the scroll or volumen, a long roll of writing material. Creating one was a meticulous craft. It began with sheets of papyrus made from the pith of the Nile red, pressed together and glued side by side to form a continuous strip that could easily stretch to 30 feet or more. This lengthy sheet was then carefully rolled around a central wooden rod known as an umbilicus. This rod gave the scroll its structure, and you would hold onto these ends, called cornua or horns, to unroll it. The final scroll was a compact cylinder, a world of text waiting to be unfurled. But how did you find your place in such a long and continuous document? Reading a scroll was an active, two-handed affair. You would unroll the text with your right hand while simultaneously rolling up the already read portion with your left. The text itself was arranged in a series of columns, and to help your eyes track the lines without smearing the delicate ink with your fingers, a reader might use a smooth, pointed stick, perhaps even a bone stylus. This simple tool kept the precious papyrus clean and intact. Finding a specific work on a shelf crowded with identical-looking rolls was another challenge solved with elegant simplicity. A small tag made of parchment or papyrus called a syllabus was attached to the end of the scroll or hung from its protective wrapper. This tag bore the title of the work and often the author's name, a tiny beacon guiding a seeker to the right cylinder of wisdom. So the act of reading was not the quiet, page-turning experience we know today. It was a physical ritual, a deliberate unspooling of a single, long narrative thread, connecting the reader directly to the hand that had penned it centuries before. To truly understand the wisdom contained within those scroll cabinets, you must first listen for the whispers of Greek. The foundational texts of any major Roman library were not written in Latin. They were the Greek classics, the essential bedrock of all Roman intellectual life. A Roman scholar would have considered his collection worthless without the epic poems of Homer, the philosophical dialogues of Plato and Aristotle, and the powerful tragedies of playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides. The great historians, Herodotus with his inquiries and Thucydides with his gripping account of the Peloponnesian War, were not optional extras, they were required reading. This was because a proper Roman education was at its heart a Greek one. To be considered an educated man in Rome was to be fluent not just in the Greek language, but in its entire world of ideas. A senator debating in the forum would draw on the logical structures of Aristotle. A poet composing a new epic was consciously competing with the ghost of Homer. The very act of writing Roman history was shaped by the models set down by Greek predecessors. These texts were not just foreign imports gathering dust. They were the active, living source code for Roman civilization, the essential core that defined what it meant to be learned. But this deep reverence for Greek thought did not mean Rome was content to live in the shadow of another culture. On the shelves right beside those Greek classics stood the works of their own literary giants, the voices that forged a distinct and powerful Roman identity. The most prominent of these was Virgil's Aeneid, a masterpiece that was far more than just a poem. It was Rome's national epic, a foundational myth written with a profound purpose. It told the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero who fled the burning ruins of his city, endured years of wandering, and finally arrived in Italy to found the people who would one day build Rome. This narrative was a brilliant piece of cultural engineering. It directly connected Rome's origins to the legendary world of Homer's epics, while simultaneously establishing a divine mandate for Roman rule. Every Roman student would have studied the Aeneid, learning that their empire was not an accident of history, but a destiny written in the stars. Then there was the voice of Cicero, whose works filled entire sections of a library. He was not a poet but an orator and statesman, and his speeches and philosophical essays became the absolute model for clear, powerful Latin prose. For Romans, mastering the art of persuasion was essential for public life, and Cicero's texts were the ultimate textbooks. Students would memorize his arguments, dissect his sentence structure, and learn how to build a case that could sway the Senate or win a legal battle. His works taught Romans how to think and how to speak, providing the intellectual framework for running an empire. Alongside these monumental figures were the poets who captured the full spectrum of human emotion. Ovid explored mythology and the art of love with playful wit and psychological insight. Horace wrote odes that reflected on life, love, and the pursuit of a simple, happy existence. And Catullus poured his own heart into poems of passionate, sometimes raw, love and hatred. These authors gave Romans a mirror to see themselves, not just as conquerors and administrators, but as complex individuals with loves, losses, and dreams. Their works were not merely collected, they were internalized, studied in schools, and recited in forums, forming the very heart of what it meant to be Roman. Yet the scrolls on those shelves held more than timeless poetry and philosophy. They contained the very voice of the Roman state itself, the official annals and records that painstakingly documented its rise to power. Among the most revered of these were the Histories of Livy, a monumental project that aimed to chronicle the entire story of Rome from its mythical founding by Romulus all the way to his own time. Livy's work was a grand narrative filled with legendary heroes and pivotal battles, designed to instill a sense of pride and moral purpose in his readers. He was less concerned with forensic fact-checking and more with capturing the national character, showing how the virtues of early Romans forged the greatest empire on earth. But if Livy provided the grand sweeping portrait, another historian offered the sharp critical close-up. Tacitus wrote with a penetrating and often cynical eye, dissecting the inner workings of the early empire. He exposed the corruption, the paranoia, and the brutal realities of life under emperors like Tiberius and Nero. Reading Tacitus was not an exercise in patriotic celebration. It was a masterclass in understanding how power truly operates, how absolute authority can corrupt even the most brilliant minds. His histories were a vital counterbalance, a whispered warning from within the palace walls. Then there were the accounts written by the powerful themselves. The first emperor, Augustus, composed a political autobiography known as the Res Gesti, or the Deeds of the Divine Augustus. This was not a soul-searching confession. It was a brilliant piece of propaganda, a list of his achievements and benefactions to the state, carefully crafted to shape his legacy for centuries to come. Imagine finding that scroll, written in the emperor's own voice, telling you exactly how he wanted to be remembered. And for every work that survived, we know there were countless others that were lost forever. We have only fragments and references to the histories of men like Sallust or the immense volumes of Asinius Pollio himself. These lost works haunt our understanding of Rome, leaving tantalizing gaps in the story. What other perspectives, what other crucial truths simply vanished when a single scroll turned to dust? But beyond the grand narratives of poets and historians lay a collection of texts that held the empire itself together. Tucked away in those scroll cases were the dry, precise, and utterly vital documents of Roman law. This was not literature for entertainment. It was the operating system for a civilization, a complex web of statutes, senatorial decrees, and legal opinions that governed everything from property disputes to criminal punishments. For the Romans, law was not just a set of rules. It was a living, breathing science, and the library was its laboratory. Here, a senator preparing for a debate could consult the original text of the 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code. An administrator being sent to govern a distant province could study the specific decrees issued for that territory, and a lawyer building a case would spend hours poring over the extensive commentaries of the great jurists. Men like Gaius and Ulpian were not just lawyers, they were intellectual giants whose written interpretations of the law carried immense authority. Their works filled entire scrolls, analyzing every possible legal scenario, defining terms, and establishing principles of justice and fairness. Their genius lay in creating a flexible and logical framework that could be applied across a vast and diverse empire, from the rainy frontier of Britain to the bustling cities of Syria. Can you picture the scene, an advocate in a toga, unrolling a parchment tagged with Ulpian's name, searching for the precise argument that would win his case in the forum the next day? These texts transformed the library from a cultural center into a vital hub of practical governance, the place where the abstract idea of Rome was translated into daily order. The principles meticulously recorded in those scrolls, the very ones that lawyers and administrators relied upon, would not be forgotten when the empire fell. They would be rediscovered centuries later, forming the bedrock of legal systems across Europe and, ultimately, shaping the concepts of justice that underpin much of our modern world. You would also find scrolls containing the blueprints for the empire itself. Beyond the poetry and legal codes, Roman libraries safeguarded a different kind of wisdom, one dedicated to the practical science of building and maintaining a civilization. These were the scientific and technical manuals, the hard-won knowledge applied to conquer nature and improve daily life. The most famous of these was Vitruvius's De Architectura, a comprehensive guide that covered everything from selecting materials for city walls to designing aqueducts and the precise acoustics of a theater. Vitruvius did not just list building techniques, he embedded them in philosophy, arguing that good architecture must exhibit strength, utility, and beauty. His work was the essential reference for the engineers who raised the Colosseum and spanned rivers with majestic bridges. On a more intimate scale were the agricultural handbooks. Cato the Elder's De Agricultura was a brutally practical guide for running a profitable farm, offering advice on everything from planting crops and pruning vines to managing the enslaved workforce that powered the Roman economy. It was a text born from the old Roman ideal of self-sufficiency, a reminder that the empire's grandeur was rooted in the soil. Then there was medicine. Roman libraries preserved and studied the works of Greek masters like Galen, whose anatomical studies, though sometimes flawed, formed the basis of medical practice for over 1,000 years. Alongside him were the writings of Dioscorides, whose meticulous catalog of plants and their medicinal properties was the ancient world's definitive pharmaceutical guide. Can you picture a Roman doctor in a distant frontier outpost unrolling a copy of Dioscorides to find the right local herb to treat a soldier's fever? These technical scrolls were not abstract theory. They were the working documents that directed the flow of water into cities, ensured the harvests that fed the legions, and healed the sick. This was knowledge with a direct and immediate purpose, the intellectual engine room of an empire that knew how to put ideas to work. Yet the most personal and dog-eared scrolls in a Roman's collection were often not about history or law, but about how to live. Roman libraries were treasure houses of philosophy, and these texts were not abstract academic exercises. They were practical manuals for navigating the chaos of human existence, offering competing visions of a good life. On one shelf you would find the powerful works of the Stoics. The writings of Seneca the Younger offered piercing advice on managing anger, facing adversity, and the wise use of wealth. His letters read like urgent conversations with a trusted friend. Then there was the emperor himself, Marcus Aurelius, whose private journal, known as the Meditations, was a raw, personal struggle to maintain his virtue and composure amid the immense burdens of power. He wrote to remind himself how to be a good man while ruling the world, his words a quiet anchor in a sea of imperial demands. This was a philosophy of duty, resilience, and finding inner peace by accepting what you cannot control. It was the perfect creed for a soldier, a senator, or an emperor, but right beside it stood a radically different worldview, the teachings of the Epicureans. The poet Lucretius, in his magnificent work on the nature of things, argued that the universe was nothing but atoms and void, that the gods were distant and unconcerned with human affairs, and that the chief goal of life was not virtue, but the absence of pain and the cultivation of simple pleasures among friends. For a Roman citizen burdened by political ambition and social expectation, the idea of withdrawing to a tranquil garden to seek a quiet mind was a revolutionary and deeply attractive alternative. And then there were the skeptics whose arguments were preserved in the works of Cicero. They questioned whether any certain knowledge was even possible, teaching the value of suspending judgment and continuously questioning all claims to truth. Can you see how these texts turned the library into a kind of mental gymnasium? A young Roman could spend an afternoon wrestling with Seneca's call to duty, then be seduced by Lucretius's vision of atomic tranquility, only to have Cicero whisper that he should doubt them both. This was not a quiet, solitary study. These ideas spilled out into the public squares, shaping political debates, influencing legal decisions, and providing solace in times of personal crisis. The Roman engagement with philosophy was a deep, personal search for meaning, a quest to find a compass for the soul within the endless rows of scrolls. A Roman library's philosophical scrolls offered guidance for the soul, but another set of texts promised mastery over the chaotic public world. For any ambitious man, the ultimate prize was not a quiet mind but a powerful voice, and the key to that power lay in the rhetorical handbooks. These were not leisurely reads, they were practical training manuals for political and legal combat. The most influential of them all was Cicero's De Orator, a dialogue that framed the perfect orator as the ideal citizen. Cicero argued that true persuasion was not about clever tricks or flowery language. It demanded a profound and sweeping education. The ideal speaker, in his view, needed a complete command of law, history, philosophy, and human psychology. He had to be a master of every subject to argue any point effectively. This was a radical idea, that eloquence and moral character were intertwined, and that the power of speech carried a heavy responsibility. Can you envision a young senator, his heart pounding before a crucial vote, studying Cicero's 5-part structure for constructing an unanswerable argument, learning how to win over a hostile crowd by first establishing his own goodwill and character? But how did one move from theory to practice, from understanding the principles to delivering a speech that could sway an emperor? That crucial bridge was built by Quintilian in his monumental work, the Institutio Oratoria. This was the complete curriculum. Quintilian laid out the education of an orator from childhood, teaching him how to find compelling arguments, how to arrange them for maximum impact, and most importantly, how to deliver them with the precise gesture, tone, and emotional conviction that would make them irresistible. He taught the art of memory, the control of the voice, and the power of a well-timed pause. In the Roman Forum, where fortunes and lives hung on the quality of a single speech, these texts were more valuable than swords. They were the invisible weapons that built reputations, defended the accused, and shaped the policy of an empire, all through the disciplined, learned, and utterly persuasive power of the spoken word. These rhetorical weapons were useless without a map. For all their verbal power, Roman senators and generals needed to know the shape of the world they sought to command. Tucked away in the libraries, among the philosophical scrolls and legal commentaries, were cartographic treasures of staggering ambition. One of the most remarkable was not on papyrus at all, but carved in stone. Imagine walking past a wall in central Rome and seeing the entire city laid out before you in precise miniature detail. This was the former Urbis Rami, a massive marble map that stretched over 150 feet in length. It depicted every temple, every apartment block, every street and staircase in the Eternal City, a monumental act of civic pride and administrative genius. A city planner could use it to settle a property dispute, a priest could locate a specific shrine, and a visiting official could grasp the overwhelming complexity of the empire's heart. This was Rome understanding itself, its anatomy rendered in cool, permanent stone, but the empire's gaze extended far beyond its own walls. For that, scholars turned to the geographical works based on the travels and calculations of men like Strabo and Ptolemy. Strabo's Geographica was a sprawling descriptive work, a compilation of everything known about the world from Britain to India. He blended his own observations with reports from merchants and soldiers, creating a vivid, almost literary picture of distant lands, their customs, and their resources. Ptolemy, working later, took a more scientific approach. His Geographia included instructions for creating maps based on a grid of latitude and longitude, an attempt to impose mathematical order onto the known world. Can you picture a Roman general, on the eve of an invasion, unrolling a copy of Ptolemy's work to study the lay of a foreign land, its mountain passes and river crossings? These texts were not academic curiosities. They were vital for plotting military campaigns, securing supply lines for the legions, and establishing new trade routes that brought silk from China and spices from India. They gave the Roman ruling class a spatial understanding of their domain, transforming a vague collection of provinces into a coherent, manageable empire. This knowledge was a form of control, allowing Rome to see its world, and in seeing it, to command it. The grand public libraries were only half the story of Roman intellectual life. For the elite, knowledge was also a deeply private passion, and their personal libraries became sanctuaries of the mind. Step inside the villa of a man like Cicero. Here, the library was not a vast public hall but a carefully appointed room, often adorned with busts of great thinkers and philosophers. The scrolled cabinets themselves were works of art, crafted from citrus wood or ivory, a clear declaration of wealth and refinement. This was not merely a collection, it was an extension of the owner's identity. A senator like Cicero curated his scrolls with the same precision he used in politics, gathering texts on rhetoric, law, and philosophy that reflected his own ambitions and beliefs. His friend Atticus maintained a legendary library in Athens, functioning as a kind of ancient research center and publishing house, supplying Cicero with copies of the latest Greek texts. Then there was Lucullus, a general who returned from the Eastern wars with entire libraries as spoils. He built a spectacular complex on the outskirts of Rome, with colonnaded walks and dining rooms opening directly onto his collection. He opened his doors to Greek philosophers and Roman scholars alike, offering them a space to study and debate amidst his treasures. Can you see the scene? A small group of thinkers gathered in a sunlit room, a slave fetching a specific scroll of Plato as the conversation grows heated over wine. These private libraries were not locked away. They were semi-public hubs where access was a privilege granted to friends and fellow intellectuals. This transformed the wealthy Roman's home into a vibrant center of cultural exchange, where the personal pursuit of knowledge seamlessly blended with the social duty of patronage, ensuring that wisdom flowed freely among the powerful and the learned. The same libraries that offered philosophical calm also contained the hard, practical knowledge for waging war. Among the scrolls of poetry and law were military manuals, texts written not for the soul, but for the battlefield. These were the essential guides for any Roman commander, distilling centuries of brutal experience into actionable strategies. One of the most famous surviving examples is the Strathuge, modeled by Frontinus. He was no armchair theorist, but a seasoned governor and military man who had personally commanded legions in Britain. His work was not a dry list of principles, it was a vivid collection of clever tricks and ruses pulled from history. He categorized hundreds of stratagems, showing how a general could ambush an enemy, how to lure them into a trap by feigning retreat, or how to secure a water supply in hostile territory. This was a playbook for outthinking your opponent, a catalog of proven cunning, but these manuals went far beyond clever ploys. They contained exhaustive details on the unglamorous foundations of military success, logistics, and engineering. A general planning a campaign would study how to calculate the exact amount of grain needed to feed an army on the march, how to construct a fortified camp in a matter of hours, or the most effective way to build a siege tower or a battering ram. This knowledge transformed a mob of soldiers into a disciplined, mobile fortress. Alongside these handbooks were the campaign histories, many of which are now tragically lost. We know that Julius Caesar wrote his own gripping commentaries on the Gallic Wars, partly as propaganda, but also as a detailed military report for the Senate and his rivals. But what of the personal accounts of other legendary commanders, men like Scipio Africanus who defeated Hannibal, or Pompey the Great who cleared the Mediterranean of pirates? Their first-hand reports, once studied by aspiring generals, have vanished. These lost texts represent a huge gap in our understanding, the erased field manuals for building an empire. Can you see a young officer on the eve of his first command, unrolling a scroll of Frontinus by lamplight, memorizing a stratagem used against the Gauls, or a governor consulting an old campaign diary to understand how to pacify a newly conquered tribe? In a world without formal military academies, the library was the training ground. The wisdom in those scrolls, a blend of clever deception and meticulous planning, was what allowed the legions to conquer and hold an empire that stretched from the deserts of Africa to the misty hills of Scotland. Yet the same scrolls that taught a general to build a siege engine also guided a priest in reading the will of the gods. Roman libraries held a profound and often overlooked collection of religious texts, the sacred scripts that governed the relationship between the mortal and the divine. At the very heart of the state religion were the Sibylline books, a collection of ancient Greek prophecies so powerful they were kept in a stone chest beneath the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. These were not scrolls for casual study. They were the empire's emergency oracle, consulted only by direct order of the Senate in moments of existential crisis, a plague, a military disaster, or an omen too terrifying to ignore. The priest would unroll the fragile texts, searching for a verse that prescribed a specific ritual to appease the gods, a directive that could alter the fate of Rome itself. Alongside these legendary books were the detailed manuals of the augurs, the priests trained in the art of divination. Their scrolls contained a complex language of natural signs, a code for interpreting the flight patterns of birds, the feeding habits of sacred chickens, or the appearance of lightning in a particular quarter of the sky. For a senator, no important public meeting, no election, and no military campaign could begin until the augurs had taken these readings and declared the gods favorable. This was not superstition, it was a formal branch of statecraft, a way of seeking divine approval for every major public action. But this deep connection between religion and daily life extended far beyond the Senate House. Private citizens also filled their personal libraries with prayers, household rituals, and guides for interpreting everyday omens. A Roman paterfamilias, the head of a family, might consult a scroll to learn the correct words for prayer to the household gods, the lares, or to understand the meaning of a stray owl hooting near his home. These texts provided a framework for navigating a world believed to be filled with divine presence, offering a sense of order and control in an unpredictable universe. The library, therefore, was not just a repository for philosophy and poetry. It was the ultimate sourcebook for both public and private life, a place where one could learn how to build an aqueduct, deliver a speech, and correctly read a God's message in the path of an eagle across the sky. Of course, even the most serious Roman needed an escape from the weight of philosophy and law. Beyond the stern texts of statecraft lay a world of pure entertainment, where the scrolls contained laughter, passion, and biting wit. Roman libraries had a vibrant and popular section dedicated to poetry and drama, works meant not just for silent study, but for lively recitation and performance. The comedies of Plautus and Terence were crowd favorites, filled with mistaken identities, clever slaves outwitting their bumbling masters, and all the familiar chaos of romantic entanglements. These plays were the sitcoms of their day, packed with slapstick and rapid-fire dialogue that could make an entire theater roar with laughter. Yet beneath the farce lay sharp observations about social class, money, and human folly, holding a mirror up to Roman society itself. For those with a taste for darker fare, the tragedies of Seneca offered a thrilling descent into the abyss. His plays explored themes of revenge, power, and madness, filled with gripping speeches and supernatural horrors. They were intense psychological dramas that allowed an audience to safely confront their deepest fears and darkest impulses from the safety of their seats. Then there was the poetry that spoke directly to the heart. The love poems of Catullus were nothing like the formal, public epics of Virgil. They were intensely personal, raw, and passionate, chronicling the ecstasy and agony of his own turbulent love affair. He wrote of kisses that numbered in the thousands and of a pain so deep it felt like a physical illness. This was a new, intimate voice, one that made the grand emotions of epic poetry feel human scale and immediate. And for the Romans who enjoyed a good dose of cynicism, there were the satires of Juvenal. He was a master of social criticism, using savage humor and exaggeration to skewer the vices of the city, from the obsession with wealth and status to the corruption of the elite. His famous line, "Who will guard the guards themselves," is a timeless question about power, but much of his work was a hilarious, if scathing, commentary on the daily absurdities of urban life. These scrolls of comedy, tragedy, and satire provided the essential counterbalance to the library's more serious holdings. They were the proof that Roman intellectual life was not a somber duty, but a full engagement with every facet of the human experience, from the highest ideals to the most relatable follies. Before a young Roman could command a legion or sway the Senate, he first had to master a small, relentless book. The foundational text for nearly every educated Roman was a grammatical primer, and the most famous of these was written by a scholar named Aelius Donatus. His Ars Grammatica was the essential schoolbook, the Roman equivalent of a first-grade Ritter combined with a complete guide to the language. It was so ubiquitous that for centuries afterward, the very word donat became synonymous with a grammar textbook. This small manual did not deal in grand philosophies or epic poetry. It was a drill instructor for the mind, teaching the absolute basics, the parts of speech, the forms of nouns and verbs, and the intricate rules of Latin syntax. Students would spend countless hours memorizing its dry, precise classifications, their minds being shaped by its logical structure before they were ever allowed to touch the works of Virgil or Cicero. This was the unglamorous but vital boot camp of the intellect, the necessary training that built the mental discipline required for all higher learning. Without this mastery of grammar, the great library of Roman thought remained a locked door. Alongside these primers stood another essential tool, the lexicon or dictionary. While not as comprehensive as our modern versions, these scrolls were vital for navigating the two languages of Roman education. A student would consult a Greek-Latin glossary to unlock the meaning of a Homeric epic, or use a Latin synonym guide to find just the right word for his own composition. These texts were the practical keys that allowed a young mind to move freely between the linguistic worlds that defined Roman culture, but the real work began when the student graduated from grammar to literature. Here he did not face the original text alone. He was guided by extensive commentaries, scholarly works that surrounded the classic authors with a protective fence of explanation and interpretation. A scroll of Virgil's Aeneid, for instance, would often be accompanied by a separate commentary that explained obscure mythological references, detailed historical contexts, and debated the poet's possible hidden meanings. These commentaries were the ancient equivalent of a professor's lecture notes, preserving generations of academic debate and ensuring that every student understood the text not just as a story, but as a complex work of art with a very specific moral and political purpose. This entire educational pipeline, from Donatus' grammar to the dense commentaries, had one ultimate goal: to produce masters of rhetoric. Every parsed verb and every analyzed poetic line was a stepping stone toward the power of persuasive speech. The grammatical drills taught the precision required for clear argument. The study of poetry under a commentary taught a student how to deconstruct and emulate effective language. He was learning how thought could be shaped into words and how those words could then be weaponized. The library's schoolbook section was therefore the engine room of the Roman elite. It was here, amid these dry grammatical texts and annotated classics, that the next generation of senators, lawyers, and generals was forged. The ability to think with discipline and speak with clarity was not a soft skill. It was the sharpest tool for climbing the political ladder and maintaining social control. The quiet hum of a schoolroom, with students reciting conjugations, was the sound of the empire's future leadership being built, one grammatical rule at a time. For all the wisdom that survives, a haunting silence echoes from the empty spaces on those library shelves. The scrolls that have reached us are the lucky survivors of a shipwreck, while the vast ocean of Roman literature lies submerged and lost forever. These are the ghosts of literature, works we know existed only because other authors mentioned them with reverence or frustration. Consider the lost histories. We have tantalizing fragments of the Roman Republic's earliest annalists, men like Quintus Fabius Pictor, who wrote in Greek to explain Rome to the wider world. Their full accounts, the foundational bedrock of Roman history, are gone. Entire libraries of personal memoirs from legendary figures have vanished. The commentaries of Scipio Africanus, the general who finally defeated Hannibal, would offer an unparalleled view into the mind of a military genius. What strategic insights, what personal reflections on saving Rome from its greatest threat were recorded in those scrolls, only to crumble into dust. The loss extends to the very origins of Roman poetry. Before Virgil, there was Aeneid, whose epic annals was the national poem of its day, a sprawling work that traced Rome's history from Aeneas to his own time. Later Romans spoke of it with awe, but we have only disconnected lines, beautiful shards of a shattered mosaic. We know the names of other pioneering poets like Nevius, who wrote an epic on the First Punic War, but their voices are almost completely silent. These were the creators who forged the Latin language into a tool for great art, and we can only hear their echoes in the works of those who came after them. Even more heartbreaking is the loss of entire genres. Roman tragedy, for instance, was a major force in its time. We know the names of celebrated tragedians like Lucius Accius and Marcus Pacuvius, whose powerful plays filled the theaters. But not a single complete Roman tragedy from the Republican era survives. Their powerful speeches and dramatic plots, which surely influenced later writers like Seneca, are mere titles in a list, ghosts of a vibrant performance tradition. The same is true for the early masters of satire, Lucilius, whose work was the model for Horace and Juvenal. His poems were personal, conversational, and wildly popular, but they survive only in quotations by grammarians preserving an interesting turn of phrase. We have lost the man and are left with only his fingerprints, and what of the scientific and technical knowledge that simply evaporated? The great library of Alexandria held countless Greek texts that were studied and translated by Roman scholars, but those originals are gone. We know of Roman works on agriculture, medicine, and engineering that have disappeared, taking with them centuries of accumulated practical wisdom. The loss is like a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. We can see the rough outline of Roman intellectual life, but the intricate picture, the color, and the detail is gone. This irrevocable erasure by time, fire, and decay leaves us with an eternal mystery. What single lost work would you most want to pull from the ashes, to hear a voice from the ancient world speak to us directly, without the filter of centuries? A library's true life was not in its scrolls, but in the people who animated them. These vast collections were managed by a dedicated staff of scholars and librarians, with one of the most famous being Gaius Julius Hyginus. Appointed by Augustus himself to oversee the Palatine Library, Hyginus was not merely a custodian of books. He was a freedman, a former pupil of the great scholar Alexander Polyhistor, and a prolific author in his own right, writing on topics from agriculture to the genealogies of the gods. His role exemplifies the intellectual stature required for the job. A head librarian was a public intellectual, a curator of the empire's collective mind. His duties were immense. He was responsible for acquiring new texts, a task that could involve negotiating with booksellers, commissioning copies from private collections, or even receiving entire libraries seized as spoils of war. Each new scroll had to be authenticated, its text checked for errors before it could be assigned a place in the correct cabinet. Then came the monumental task of organization. The librarian decided the cataloging system, grouping works by genre, author, or perhaps even chronological period, ensuring that a senator seeking a specific legal opinion or a poet looking for Greek inspiration could find what they needed without a day's futile search. But his most vital function was to supervise the library scriptorium, the copying room where the magic of preservation happened. Here, teams of highly trained slaves, the liberi, worked under strict supervision. One slave would read aloud slowly from a master scroll, while several scribes simultaneously wrote down his words, creating multiple new copies in a single session. This was how a text moved from a unique, fragile original to a reproducible form, its ideas safeguarded against the certain decay of a single papyrus roll. The librarian would proofread these copies, his trained eye catching a misspelled word or omitted line, ensuring the intellectual purity of the new edition. He was also a research assistant to the scholars who frequented the halls. Can you see him, a man like Hyginus, guiding a young historian to the latest annals, or helping a philosopher compare two different commentaries on Aristotle? This human framework of expertise transformed the library from a silent archive into a vibrant, working institution, a humming workshop of the intellect where knowledge was not just stored, but actively curated, multiplied, and put to use. The ultimate expression of this intellectual passion was carved in marble and gold by the emperors themselves. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, understood that controlling knowledge was as important as commanding legions. His library of the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill was more than a building. It was a political statement in stone. Situated right next to his own palace, this complex physically connected imperial power with divine and human wisdom. You would approach to a grand colonnade, entering a hall where the air was cool and the light fell softly from above, illuminating polished marble floors and walls lined with the finest citrus wood cabinets. In one apse stood a magnificent statue of Augustus, and in the other, a figure of the god Apollo, patron of the arts. The message was unmistakable. The emperor was the new guardian of civilization, the source of both order and enlightenment. This was cultural patronage on a monumental scale, designed to legitimize his rule by presenting him as the heir to Alexander the Great and the protector of all Greek and Latin learning. A century later, the Emperor Trajan would push this concept to its absolute peak. His forum was the largest the world had ever seen, a sprawling complex of basilicas, markets, and a towering victory column. And at its very heart, in the most prestigious spot, he placed not another temple, but the Bibliotheca Olpia. This was not one library, but two identical, breathtaking structures facing each other across a courtyard. One housed every great work of Latin literature, the other every essential Greek text. Their reading halls were 2 stories high, with elegant balconies providing access to the upper tiers of scroll cases. The walls were adorned with portraits of philosophers and poets, and readers could look out between the columns to see Trajan's column, a stone narrative of his military conquests, rising just outside. The symbolism was profound and deliberate. Here in the center of civic life, the empire's military triumphs were literally surrounded by and grounded in its cultural achievements. This architectural pairing declared that Roman power was built as much on books as it was on battles. These imperial libraries set a standard that echoed across the entire empire. From the reconstructed ruins of Carthage in North Africa to the remote military outpost of Timgad, provincial governors built their own public libraries. These smaller copies were deliberate echoes of Rome's grandeur, outposts of culture that brought the Latin language and Roman values to the frontiers. They were concrete proof that you were part of a vast, sophisticated civilization. No matter how far you were from the capital, to walk into the Bibliotheca Olpia was to feel the immense, confident weight of the Roman Empire, an empire that believed its greatest legacy would be found not on the battlefield, but on the neatly tagged scrolls within a quiet hall. But of all the libraries from ancient Rome, one survived not through copying or tradition, but through catastrophe. The Villa of the Papyri, a sumptuous seaside estate in the town of Herculaneum, offers our only direct physical window into the contents of a Roman library. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it did not just bury the town in ash, it unleashed a superheated pyroclastic surge that instantly carbonized everything in its path. This wave of volcanic gas and debris baked the villa's entire collection of papyrus scrolls into blackened, brittle logs. For centuries, they lay entombed in hardened ash, their secrets seemingly lost forever. When excavators rediscovered them in the 1700s, they found a library exactly as its owner had left it, a collection of over 1,800 scrolls, all carefully stored in their wooden cases. These were not stone tablets or waxed boards, but the original handwritten texts transformed by fire into fragile lumps of charcoal. The problem was and remains how to read them. For hundreds of years, the only method was the heartbreakingly destructive process of physically unrolling them. Specially designed machines would carefully try to peel apart the layers, but the scrolls were so fragile they would often crumble into dust, taking their unique knowledge with them. The few that were successfully opened revealed Greek texts, mostly the works of a philosopher named Philodemus, an Epicurean. This was a stunning revelation, a single intellectual's personal collection frozen in time. But the vast majority of the library remained locked inside its carbonized shells, an unreadable treasure trove. Today, a new revolution is underway. Scientists are using advanced technology like CT scanning and artificial intelligence to peer inside these scrolls without ever touching them. They can now digitally unroll them, mapping the layers and deciphering the ink, which was made from carbon and therefore has a slightly different density from the carbonized papyrus. This non-invasive process is slowly, painstakingly, bringing the entire library back to life. So far, the results confirm that this was a deeply personal collection, dominated by Epicurean philosophy. It gives us an unparalleled snapshot, not of a grand public institution, but of one man's mind. What other lost works might still be discovered in that blackened heap, waiting for the right technology to finally give them a voice? Even as the Roman library perfected the scroll, a quiet revolution was taking shape on its shelves. Alongside the cylindrical volumen, you would begin to find a new, more familiar object, the codex. This was not a roll, but a stack of parchment or papyrus sheets, folded and bound together along one edge, creating the first true ancestor of the modern book. Its advantages over the scroll were immediate and profound. A codex was remarkably durable, its sturdy covers protecting the pages within from the tears and fraying that constantly threatened fragile scroll ends. It was also incredibly compact. A single codex could hold the contents of multiple scrolls, the equivalent of an entire epic poem or a complete philosophical treatise in one portable volume. But its most revolutionary feature was access. With a scroll, you had to physically unwind through the text to find a specific passage, a slow and cumbersome process. With a codex, you could simply flip to any point in the text almost instantly, a transformation in how one interacted with knowledge. This new format was initially embraced by a new and rapidly growing community, the early Christians. They found the codex ideal for their needs, perfectly suited for compiling and cross-referencing the separate Gospels and epistles into a single, cohesive sacred text. The ability to quickly flip between the book of Isaiah and the Gospel of Matthew during a theological debate was a powerful tool that the scroll simply could not provide. For the early church, the codex was practical, portable, and became a symbol of their distinct identity. Roman scholars and bureaucrats, always pragmatic, soon recognized the same utility. Lawyers found they could reference different sections of the legal code with unprecedented speed. Scholars could compare philosophical arguments side by side. The codex made knowledge not just more portable, but more searchable and interactive. The shift from scroll to codex was not an instant event, but a slow migration of words from one form to another, a process that took centuries. Yet by the time the Western Roman Empire faded, the victory of the codex was complete. The long, graceful scroll, the very icon of the classical library, had been superseded by the humble, efficient, bound book. This was not merely a change in container, it was a fundamental rewiring of the human relationship with text, setting the stage for everything from the medieval manuscript to the printed volume you might hold in your hands today. Beyond the ordered worlds of law and philosophy, the scroll cases held secrets of a different kind. Roman libraries guarded collections that modern minds might label as magic or the occult, but for the ancients, this was simply another layer of reality waiting to be understood. You could find texts like the Cyrenides, a sprawling work that blurred the lines between medicine, botany, and pure enchantment. It claimed that every animal, plant, and stone possessed a hidden spirit and a corresponding power. The text would instruct a reader on how to create a magical amulet, perhaps by inscribing a specific stone with a secret name, and then using it to treat a fever or ward off evil. This was not seen as superstition, but as a specialized branch of natural science, where the symbolic and the physical were intimately fused. Alongside these hybrid manuals were dedicated scrolls on astrology, complex charts mapping the influence of celestial bodies on human destiny. A Roman planning a journey, a business venture, or even a wedding might consult such a text to determine the most auspicious day, believing the stars themselves dictated the flow of fortune. And then there were the guides to dream interpretation. In a world where dreams were considered messages from the gods or glimpses into the future, these scrolls acted as decoders. A dream of flying might predict a rise in status, while a dream of losing a tooth could be an omen of impending loss. These specialized collections reveal a Roman intellectual world far more diverse and spiritually fluid than we often assume. The same library that provided a senator with the legal framework to govern a province also offered him a magical charm for protection and a starlit map for navigating his own fate. This coexistence of rigorous logic and esoteric belief was not a contradiction. It was a complete picture of a universe where every phenomenon, from a planet's path to a nighttime vision, was a piece of a vast, interconnected puzzle. A Roman library's vast collection was not born from quiet contemplation, but from the bustling, commercial heart of the empire. Filling those elegant wooden cabinets was a complex economic operation, driven by a thriving book trade that stretched across the Mediterranean. In Rome, specialized booksellers, the librerii, operated shops where you could commission a copy of Virgil's latest work or browse through imported Greek texts. This was a commercial marketplace for ideas where a wealthy patron could send a slave with a shopping list of desired authors, but the primary engine for stocking a library, especially a public one, was its own internal scriptorium. This was a factory for the mind, a room filled with rows of scribes, almost always enslaved men trained in the exacting art of handwriting. The process was a marvel of organized production. One reader, often the most educated slave, would sit at the front and recite slowly and clearly from a master scroll. A dozen or more scribes would then write down his words simultaneously, their styly or red pens scratching across fresh sheets of papyrus or parchment. This assembly line method could produce multiple copies of a single text in one session, transforming a unique and fragile original into a reproducible, distributable commodity. The head librarian would then proofread these new copies, his sharp eye scanning for any error in transcription, ensuring the intellectual purity of the work before it was tagged and placed on the shelf. Yet the most dramatic method of acquisition was not commerce or copying, but conquest. Roman military campaigns, particularly in the Greek East, were not just about seizing territory and treasure. They were also cultural raids. When a Roman general like Aemilius Paulus defeated the king of Macedon, or when Sulla sacked Athens, they did not overlook the libraries. Entire collections, the accumulated wisdom of a city or a dynasty, were packed up and shipped back to Rome as the ultimate spoil of war. This was more than just looting, it was a powerful symbolic act. By absorbing the great libraries of Greece, Rome was physically transplanting the source of classical knowledge, declaring itself the new and rightful custodian of that tradition. So every scroll in a Roman library had a biography. It could be a commercial product bought and paid for in a Roman market. It could be a domestic clone, painstakingly reproduced by an enslaved hand. Or it could be a trophy, a silent witness to a military victory that had captured not just land, but the very mind of a conquered culture. The library stood as a monument built not only by scholars, but by merchants, scribes, and soldiers. The wisdom of 1,000 years could be erased in a single night. The slow decline of Rome's great libraries was not the result of one single disaster, but a relentless storm of calamities, each one stripping away another layer of the empire's collective memory. Fires were a constant and terrifying threat in a city of wooden tenements and crowded marble halls. The library of the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine, founded by Augustus, was severely damaged by a fire, its precious scrolls turning to ash and smoke. Another legendary collection, the Library of the Portico of Octavia, was consumed by flames not once but twice. Each blaze was a cultural catastrophe, obliterating unique manuscripts and the irreplaceable first-hand accounts of history. But fire was only the most dramatic agent of destruction. A quieter, more insidious enemy was always at work, the slow decay of the papyrus itself. In the damp Roman climate, the organic scrolls were vulnerable to mold, rot, and voracious insects. A scroll left untended for a generation could simply crumble into dust at the touch, its words lost to natural entropy. Preservation required constant, active effort, a continuous cycle of recopying that would become a casualty of the empire's own unraveling. As the political and economic stability of the Western Roman Empire dissolved, the funding and will to maintain these vast repositories faded. The great public libraries, symbols of a confident and wealthy state, were no longer a priority for emperors fighting for survival on multiple frontiers. The scriptoria fell silent, their scribes dispersed, and the meticulous work of preservation ground to a halt. Then came a profound ideological shift that sealed the fate of countless texts. With the rise of Christianity as the state religion, the intellectual landscape transformed. The old pagan texts, the very foundation of classical learning, were now viewed with deep suspicion by many powerful figures. While some Christian scholars like Augustine argued for preserving and studying these works, others advocated for their outright destruction. Zealous monks seeking to purge the world of pagan influence sometimes scrubbed the ink from priceless classical manuscripts to reuse the valuable parchment for their own religious writings, a process called palimpsesting that literally wrote over the ancient past. This combination of neglect, ideological conflict, and physical decay created a perfect storm of loss. When the last Western Roman emperor was deposed in the late 5th century, the great libraries were already shadows of their former selves, their collections scattered, burned, or simply turning to dust in their cases. The long, dark night of the forgotten book had begun, leaving only fragmented echoes of a once vast world of thought. This grand mosaic of scrolls reveals a civilization in its entirety. Within the library walls, you could find the soaring epic of Virgil beside the brutal pragmatism of a military manual, the whispered secrets of a love poem next to the rigid logic of a legal code. It was all there. These institutions were the internet of their age, a central hub connecting a vast empire to the entire known world of information. A general in Britain could study the geography of Egypt, a lawyer in Rome could cite a precedent from Greece, and a philosopher could compare the teachings of Athens with the latest thoughts from Alexandria. The library was the ultimate network, a physical world wide web of papyrus and ink, making the collective knowledge of a millennium accessible to anyone who could walk through its doors. Yet this entire system was breathtakingly fragile. It depended on the steady hands of scribes, the stability of an empire, and the simple, terrible luck to avoid a single fire or the slow decay of time. We are left with only the echoes of this world, a fraction of what once existed. So much has been lost forever, turning countless voices into permanent silence. If you could reach back through the centuries and unroll just one vanished scroll, which would it be? Would you choose the lost memoirs of a legendary general, a forgotten play that made all of Rome laugh, or a philosophical text that promised a different path to happiness? Share your choice in the comments below, and let us together remember the incredible, fragile treasure that was a Roman library.